What do the greatest lawgiver in history, a king whose voice could silence the birds of the air, and the man who altered the course of human civilization have in common? Before their names were written into eternity, each of them stood in the dust beneath a burning sun, trying to gather a scattering flock. Why did God send his chosen ones not to academies or palaces, but to pasture land, to earn their keep in small coins? Today we uncover the secret of the prophetic academy, where the principal teacher was silence and the final exam was infinite patience. Chapter 1. The Secret Hidden for 1,000 Years. There is a question that has rarely been asked, and one that, if asked correctly, changes everything you thought you knew about the nature of greatness. What do Moses, peace be upon him, the lawgiver who led an entire people out of bondage, and David, peace be upon him, the king whose voice, according to tradition, could still the singing of birds, have in common? What unites Abraham, peace be upon him, the father of three world religions, with Muhammad, may God bless him and grant him peace, the man who reshaped the course of history? Not their origins, not their appearance, not the education received in the finest households of their time. Sheep. They all herded sheep. Before their great missions began, before their names were inscribed in sacred texts, before their words became law for billions of human beings, each of them stood in the dust, under a scorching sun, staff in hand, watching animals wander across a hillside. This is not legend, it is documented fact. It is narrated on the authority of Abu Huraira, may God be pleased with him, that the prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, said this plainly himself. There has been no prophet whom God sent, except that he herded sheep. His companions asked, "And you as well?" And he answered, "Yes, I herded them for the people of Mecca, for a few curats." A few curats, small coins. The man who was to become the most influential figure in human history earned a wage so modest it would barely be worth mentioning today. A wage so humble that its very smallness became a detail preserved in the Hadith, as though the narrator wanted us to stop precisely here, to sit with the incongruity of it and feel it. The future prophet, small coins, the dust of Mecca, scattering sheep. Mecca in those days was not the postcard image conjured by travel brochures. It was a loud, swelling trading city, saturated with the smells of camel wool, hot sand, and spices from distant markets. A city where power was measured in bloodlines and wealth, where noble families did not stoop to a shepherd's labor. The herdsman occupied the bottom rung of the social ladder, not because he did anything shameful, but because he did something too simple for those who considered themselves important. And it was precisely here, to this humble, socially diminished occupation, that God sent those who would one day speak to kings. But why? Why not a palace? Not an academy? Not a military camp where leaders are forged? Not the merchant houses where one learns negotiation and strategy? Why specifically sheep? Why specifically the fields? Why those long hours in silence, with no one nearby but animals and sky? Scholars have pondered this question for centuries, and what they discovered in the answer runs far deeper than it first appears. So much deeper that when you truly understand it, you begin to see not only the prophets differently, you begin to see your own life differently. But first we must understand what actually happens to a person who goes out day after day into a field with a staff and a flock. What this work deposits in him. What it gives him that no palace, no academy, no position of rank can provide. And this is where the story becomes genuinely strange. Chapter 2. The School Without Walls. Imagine dawn on the outskirts of Mecca. Not the dawn you see through a window. A different dawn. The kind you meet on your feet, when the first cold light has just begun to rise over the horizon, and the air still carries the scent of night. The stones underfoot are dark gray and sharp, warmed through the day and not yet fully cooled. The silence is deep enough to hear the flock breathe, and you are alone, or nearly alone, because the presence of animals nearby is a particular kind of solitude, one that doesn't distract, but deepens. It was in this silence that Muhammad, may God bless him and grant him peace, came of age. An orphan, without a father from birth, who lost his mother in childhood, who lived in the home of his grandfather, then his uncle, in other people's houses, however kind, however close. A man who from his earliest years was given to understand, you do not have what others have. And yet, a man who was given something else entirely, something that neither wealth nor lineage can bestow. An empty field, long hours, a flock of sheep that never quite obeys the way you want. Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, one of the greatest hadith commentators in Islamic history, wrote about this with a precision worth citing in full. Explaining the wisdom of the prophets shepherding, peace be upon them, he observed, "The wisdom behind the prophets herding sheep before their prophethood is the acquisition of experience in caring for them. This was preparation for guiding their communities in the future. And in caring for them, they cultivated within themselves gentleness and compassion." Gentleness and compassion. Two words easily spoken, and extraordinarily difficult to cultivate in oneself. They cannot be learned from a book. They cannot be received through instruction. They come only through experience, through living, physical, daily experience of caring for something weaker than yourself. And that is precisely what the sheep provided. Because a sheep is not an impressive creature. It possesses no majesty, like a horse, no strength, like a camel, no obvious intelligence. It is weak, skittish, and unpredictable. It scatters for no apparent reason, halts at the most inconvenient moment, drifts from the flock, and manages to end up precisely where it should not be. The shepherd cannot command it. He cannot frighten it into submission. A frightened sheep only becomes worse. He can only guide, patiently, again and again, retrieving the strays, finding water when the flock grows restless, sensing when the animals are exhausted and it is time to stop, not because it is convenient for the shepherd, but because the flock needs it. This is a model of leadership, not the kind described in management books, not the kind taught on leadership courses. The real kind, learned in body and soul through years of daily labor. Ibn Hajar continues, by understanding the differences in the characters of the sheep and seeing how they, despite their weakness and complete dependence, constantly scatter, the prophets trained themselves in patience toward their communities, came to understand the differences in people's characters and the variation in their minds. There it is, the key word, differences. Every sheep in a flock is unlike the others. Each has its own temperament, its own habits, its own response to danger and exhaustion. The shepherd who spends months and years with the same flock begins to feel this. He starts to notice, this one always leads, that one always lags behind, this one needs prodding, that one needs calming. And gradually, something forms within him that has no precise name, but which experienced leaders recognize immediately. The ability to see a person in their individuality, not as part of a mass, but as a distinct being with distinct needs. This ability cannot be developed in a classroom. It can only be developed in a field. But there was something else as well, something spoken of less often, and which may in fact have been the most important of all. The shepherding gave something that no city could offer. No marketplace, no household, however wealthy. Silence. Long hours in solitude, with no people nearby with their noise, their intrigues, their constant clamor. Only you, the flock, the sky above, and the earth below. A thought that in the city is always interrupted by something external, here can travel as far as it wishes. It is in this kind of silence that what we later call wisdom begins. And it was into this silence, this field, this invisible school without walls or teachers, that God sent those who would one day speak in his name. But this was only the first part of the preparation, because silence teaches one how to think. What teaches one how to act, that is a separate lesson, harsher, more physical, more demanding. Chapter 3, The Lesson That Cannot Be Learned, Sitting Down. There is knowledge that enters through the mind. It is read in books, heard from teachers, memorized and reproduced. It is useful. It is necessary. But there is another knowledge, the kind that enters through the hands, through aching feet, through a back that throbs by evening, through the moment when you have done everything right and it still didn't work because the sheep decided otherwise. This knowledge is not read, it is earned. And it was earned by the future prophets, peace be upon them, on dusty pasture land long before their names entered history. Imagine a specific scene, not abstract, not poetic, physical. High noon, the sun over Mecca so fierce that shadows nearly vanish, the stones so hot that a palm laid against them would burn, the air shimmering above the ground, and the flock, instead of staying together and moving in the right direction, is scattering. One sheep has wandered left, behind a bush of no particular interest. Another has stopped in the middle of the path and refuses to move. A third has found a crevice and wedged herself into it with all the seriousness of someone who has decided this is her primary task for the day. The shepherd cannot shout. Shouting frightens them, and then the whole flock bolts in every direction, and the situation becomes several times worse. He cannot abandon one to retrieve another, because the abandoned sheep will make immediate use of the lapse in attention. He can only walk, patiently, step by step, first to the one in the crevice, then to the one behind the bush, then back to nudge the one standing in the middle of the path. And do this not once, but all day, every day, week after week, month after month. This is precisely what Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani describes, explaining the hidden wisdom of the practice. For shepherding was a school of patience for them. While tending the flock, gathering those that scattered, moving them from pasture to pasture, guarding them from predators and thieves, they learned to be patient. Predators and thieves. Another detail easily overlooked. A shepherd is not simply a man who walks behind a flock. He is a man who bears responsibility for the lives of those in his care, and those lives are constantly under threat. A wolf can appear from any direction, silently, swiftly, in the moment attention has wavered. A thief gives no warning of his approach. Danger is always real and not always visible. The shepherd lives in a state of continuous vigilance, not anxious, not panicked, calm, steady, background vigilance that never fully switches off. This is a state impossible to cultivate in a city where there are walls and locks and neighbors close at hand. It is cultivated only in open country, where the only protection that exists is the protection you carry within yourself. But the deepest lesson was not danger, and not physical labor. The deepest lesson was in the choice of animal. Ibn Hajar pauses on this deliberately, and his observation reads almost like a detective's deduction, a small investigation beneath the obvious surface of things. Sheep were chosen for this precisely because they are weaker than other animals, and more inclined to scatter than camels or cattle. Camels and cattle can generally be controlled simply by tethering them, unlike sheep. And yet, despite their tendency to scatter, they are more docile than other livestock and more responsive to guidance. Pause on this thought. If the purpose had merely been to teach future prophets to manage a large living creature, a camel would have sufficed. If the goal was to build strength and endurance, an ox would have done. But for the lesson that was needed, specifically sheep, because the sheep perfectly replicates the model of a human being in need of guidance. Weak, dependent, prone to scattering, not out of malice, but simply because of how it is made. Unresponsive to compulsion, but responsive to patient direction. This describes most of the people who require leadership, people who are not ill-intentioned, but inconsistent, who do not consciously resist, but neither do they follow automatically. Who must be led, not pushed, not pulled, but led, continually, with a love that does not dissolve in exhaustion. And this is precisely what the flock taught. Not once, not in theory, every day, again and again, in heat and cold, in fatigue and in the monotony that is itself a trial for anyone accustomed to expecting quick results. Because there are no final results here. You gather all the sheep today, and tomorrow you begin again. You find good pasture, and in 2 days it is exhausted, and you must find another. There is no moment where you can say, "It is finished, I have succeeded, I may now rest." This very absence of a final victory was the preparation for the hardest thing in a prophetic mission. The truth is that the call to righteousness is not a single great event. It is daily labor that never ends. Those who wait for quick results will break. Those who have learned simply to follow the flock, day after day without counting the days, will endure. But there was something else still, something invisible from the outside, something that happened not in the hands or the feet, but inside, in the silence, in the long hours when the flock grazes peacefully and the shepherd has nowhere to run. It was then that the most important part of the preparation began. Chapter 4. The Silence That Speaks. There are two kinds of solitude. The first is the kind that presses in, the kind that comes within four walls when outside there is noise and movement, and yet somehow you are cut off from all of it. This is the loneliness of the city dweller, melancholy, anxious, filled with thoughts that circle endlessly and arrive nowhere. The second kind is altogether different. This is the solitude of open space, when around you there is only earth and sky and nothing else, and that nothing is not emptiness but, on the contrary, fullness. When a thought finally has as much room as it needs and goes where it wants without colliding with other voices, other opinions, other people's noise. It was this second solitude that the pasture provided. Muhammad, may God bless him and grant him peace, walked the slopes around Mecca as a young man. Behind him he left the city, its smell of leather and spice, its din of commerce, its intricate web of kinship and business in which every word carries weight and every action is observed. Ahead, only stones, sparse scrub, the horizon, and the flock. And the sky. The Arabian sky at night is not what a person sees through the glow of city lanterns. It is a different sky, dense, weighted with stars, without a single gap that could be called darkness. Gaze at it long enough, and a sensation arises that is difficult to put into words. The feeling of being small, not insignificant, but part of something so vast that the mind cannot take it in all at once. And this feeling does not frighten, it settles. It was in hours like these, beneath a sky like that, that the future prophets contemplated the creation of the world. This is not metaphor. The Quran speaks directly of those who reflect upon the creation of the heavens and the earth, and names this a mark of those possessed of understanding. The pasture created ideal conditions for exactly this, not because it was beautiful, but because there was nothing superfluous in it, nothing to distract from the essential question. The essential question is always the same. It only takes different forms depending on who is asking it. How is all of this arranged? Who stands behind it? What is asked of me? One scholar who reflected on this theme wrote, "By spending long hours alone in nature, the future prophets had the opportunity for deep reflection on the creation of the world. They observed the starlit sky, the turning of day and night, the beauty of the landscape, all these signs of God in nature, which prepared their hearts for the receiving of revelation." Prepared their hearts. Precisely so. Not their minds, but their hearts. Because revelation does not come to a place where information has merely accumulated. It comes to a place where there is space, where there is no noise, where a person is not constantly occupied with generating opinions and reactions, but is able simply to be, quietly, attentively, with an openness that is nearly impossible in the busyness of city life. This solitude became the direct precursor to the Cave of Hira. It is known that Muhammad, may God bless him and grant him peace, long before the first revelation began to withdraw to that cave, alone, for days at a time, sometimes longer. He took food and water. He spent the time in reflection, in prayer, in that particular silence he already knew how to find, because he had been learning it on the pasture land since childhood. The Cave of Hira was not a random choice. It was the next step on the same path. The pasture had taught him to find silence in open space. The cave gave that silence in its most concentrated form, an enclosed space, darkness, no external distraction, only you and what lies within. And it was there, in that silence, grown over years, nourished by long hours in the field, that the first word of revelation came. But silence was not only a tool for receiving knowledge. It served another function, perhaps more important still. It was protection. Mecca in those days was a city in which it was impossible to remain neutral. Idols stood on every corner. Pagan ritual permeated all of public life, festivals, commerce, the bonds of kinship. A person who lived in this environment constantly would inevitably be drawn into it, not by choice, but simply because it was everywhere. The pasture created distance, physical, literal distance between the future prophet and that which corrupted. While his peers participated in pagan rites, spent their time at raucous gatherings, and gradually absorbed the vices of a large trading city, he was in the field, alone, with the sky and the flock. One scholar put it this way: labor in solitude, far from the noise of cities, the chaos of markets, the intrigues and corruptions of society, guarded their hearts from defilement. Their souls remained clean and untouched, ready to receive the divine revelation. This is not passive purity, the purity of one who simply never encountered evil. This is active purity, the purity of one who stood near evil, saw it, understood what it was, and remained apart. Not out of fear, but because something within would not allow otherwise. And here the story poses a question that is quiet, but does not let go once you begin to sit with it. What was it, that thing which would not allow? An innate quality? A protection granted from above? Or something cultivated, slowly, imperceptibly, through years of simple labor under an open sky? The answer the sources offer is unexpectedly simple, and it is precisely this simplicity that makes it so weighty. Chapter 5. The price that cannot be seen from the outside. There are things that seem simple until you begin to do them yourself. Take a rope, climb a mountain, fell a tree, carry a bundle of firewood on your back, come down, sell it, return home with what you have earned by your own hands. Not much, not luxury, but yours. This sounds almost like a scene from a children's book, something simple, even a little naive, until you understand what it is actually about. The prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, spoke of this with a directness that sounds almost like a challenge. Truly, for any one of you to take a rope, go to the mountains, bring back a bundle of firewood on his back and sell it, through which God will preserve him from need, is better than to beg from people who may give or may refuse. Better than asking. There it is. That is the heart of it. Not better than sitting at home, not better than thinking great thoughts, better than asking, than depending, than placing one's dignity at the mercy of another's decision, to give or to withhold, to descend to your level or to refuse. A man carrying firewood on his back may be poor, but he has something that cannot be purchased at any price. He has a straight back. He has a face he does not have to lower when he walks out of someone else's house. He has freedom, that particular freedom born not of abundance, but of independence. This is what shepherding cultivated. Muhammad, may God bless him and grant him peace, herded sheep for a few kirats, for a wage so modest it would be embarrassing to name today. This detail is not incidental. It points towards something essential. He worked not because it was profitable. He worked because work is dignity. Because labor, however humble, gives a person something that idleness takes away. And here the story begins to speak not only of prophets, it begins to speak of every human being. Mecca in the time of the prophet's youth was a city of rigid social distinctions. Noble families did not stoop to shepherding. It was considered fit for those of lower standing. But this very man, who herded other people's sheep for small coins, later spoke to chieftains and kings in such a way that they could not refuse him. Not because he threatened, but because within him there was not a single trace of that dependence on the opinions of others which makes a person manageable. He passed through humility before greatness arrived. And that humility did not diminish him, it fortified him. A shepherd in the Mecca of that era stood at the very bottom of the social order. Not because he did something shameful, but because society had decided it was so. A young man from a respected family, though not wealthy, though orphaned, might have considered such work beneath him, might have sought more visible employment, more socially approved, something one would not be embarrassed to name at a public gathering. He herded sheep. And this choice, or rather the acceptance of this choice, which is more significant still, did to him what nothing else could. Scholars who have reflected on this have articulated it as the first and perhaps the most fundamental lesson. Shepherding was a school of humility and responsibility. It was always considered a modest, simple occupation, not a pursuit of the nobility or aristocracy. This prepared the prophets, peace be upon them, for their great mission and protected them from arrogance and pride. Pride is not merely an unpleasant character trait, it is blindness. The person afflicted by pride does not see those below him. He literally does not notice them. As individual people with individual lives, he sees only levels, only statuses, only who is more and who is less important. A shepherd cannot afford such blindness. His work demands that he see every one. Notice the one that has fallen behind. Hear the one that has gone astray. Sense that the flock is unsettled before it becomes clear why. This is not metaphor. This is literally what a good shepherd does every day. And this is precisely what the prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, would later do. But now with people, with a community, with an ummah as diverse, as inconsistent, as prone to scattering in all directions as a flock on a mountain slope in the heat of noon. The messenger of God, may God bless him and grant him peace, once articulated this connection with such clarity that it became one of his most renowned sayings. Narrated on the authority of Abdullah ibn Umar, may God be pleased with both of them, who heard the messenger of God, may God bless him and grant him peace, say, "Every one of you is a shepherd, and every one of you is responsible for his flock. A ruler is a shepherd and is responsible for his flock. A man in his household is a shepherd and is responsible for his flock." Shepherd, ra'i, that very word, not a commander, not a lord, not a manager, a shepherd. A person whose responsibility is defined not by power over those beneath him, but by care for those entrusted to him. This distinction is not semantic. It is a distinction in the very nature of a relationship. Power looks downward, care moves outward from within. And the shepherd understands this not because he has read it somewhere, but because he has lived it, through years of daily labor in which there was no room for arrogance and no excuse for indifference. And what is most remarkable of all, this lesson, the lesson of humility, responsibility, and labor by one's own hands, did not end with the pasture land. It was not left behind when trade began, when prophecy came, when thousands of followers gathered around. It became the foundation, the bedrock upon which everything else stood. And it is precisely for this reason, precisely, that what appeared to be the humblest beginning proved to be the most important of all. But before the story closes, Before the full shape of it becomes clear, there is one final thing to understand, the most unexpected of all, the thing no one anticipates hearing when the subject is pastures and prophets. Chapter 6. The Lesson That Never Ended. In the end, everything comes down to one question. Not why sheep specifically, not why a field rather than something else, not a biographical detail interesting in itself and no more. All of those questions are valid. They each lead towards something important. But behind them stands one question, the central one. And it does not sound like a historical question. It sounds personal. What does this mean for me? Because the story of the prophets shepherding, peace be upon them, is not a story about them. It is a story about a principle, about how genuine preparation for a great work is structured. And that principle has not aged. It does not belong to the 7th century and is not tied to Arabian pasture land. It works now. It works here. Look at what those years in the field did to a man, and you will find an exact set of instructions. Not theoretical, practical. Humility, not as self-abasement, but as liberation from the pride that blinds. Patience, not as passivity, but as the capacity to keep moving when no results are visible. Care, not as obligation, but as the habit of noticing those who are weak and falling behind. Silence, not as a retreat from the world, but as the condition for thought that goes into depth rather than skimming surfaces. Labor with one's own hands, not as a last resort, but as a means of preserving dignity and independence. 5 lessons, each of them simple, each of them available to anyone. Not one of them requires wealth, special circumstances, or an exceptional position in life. And not one of them can be learned theoretically. This is the most remarkable revelation in this story. The thing most people fail to notice when they read the biography of the prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace. They read about shepherding as a biographical fact, something like a detail in a resume, mentioned for the sake of completeness. But it is not a detail. It is a curriculum that God repeated again and again with every prophet in every era. Not because there was no other way, but because this particular way gave what was needed. Precisely this pasture, precisely these sheep, precisely this school without walls or teachers. Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani summed it up with the precision that distinguishes great scholars, not with beauty, but with exactness. Through this, the prophets, peace be upon them, learned to support the weak, to show gentleness to the frail, and to surround them with care. Thus, the burdens of guiding the Ummah came to them more easily than they would have otherwise, through gradual preparation received during the tending of sheep. Gradual preparation. These are the key words to hold in mind. Not sudden revelation. Not miraculous transformation occurring in a single day and remaking a person forever. But gradual preparation. Slow, unspectacular, visible to no one nearby. The kind that happens every day when you go out into the field. Every time you gather the scattered. Every time you endure, when you are exhausted, when you want to abandon everything, and you do not. This is how greatness is built. Not from the outside, but from within. Not in the moment of triumph, but in the years of preparation that precede it, years about which no one will ever write a separate book. We live in an age obsessed with speed, quick results, immediate success, visible achievements that can be shown right now, because if they cannot be shown, it is as though they never existed. We have forgotten how to do what brings no immediate result. We have forgotten how to bear the monotony that is the condition of depth. We have forgotten how to value labor that does not impress. And this is precisely why the story of the prophets shepherding, peace be upon them, sounds in our time almost like a provocation. Because it says, what seems to you simple and insignificant, the work you are doing now, the circumstances that seem below your station, the monotonous labor in which you see no growth. This is not a waste of time. This is preparation. If you do it rightly, if you are fully present in it, if you allow it to teach you what it is capable of teaching, the prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, was not ashamed that he had herded sheep for a few small coins. He told his companions this himself, openly, without embarrassment, with the calm directness of a man who has nothing to conceal and no need to embellish. Because within those few coins, within that dust, within those scattering sheep, there was something that no money can purchase. There was the preparation for speaking with people, all people, any people, in such a way that they heard. Not because he was loud, but because within him was that rare union of humility and strength, which is born in only one way, through long years in a field, in silence, with a flock, with the sky above, and with an understanding, deepening, growing richer with every passing year, that the great and the small are bound together so inextricably that one without the other is simply impossible. This is what lies hidden in the story of a shepherd with a few coins in his pocket. This is why God, again and again, prophet after prophet, age after age, began the same way. Not with a palace, not with an academy, not with a military encampment, with a field, with the morning cold, with a scattering flock, and with a silence in which a person finally hears what matters.